Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1500 to 2000 Elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. Today we have a Caro Kann Defense. My opponent goes for the advanced variation. In the previous episode, my opponent went for the fantasy variation, and we will play the move c5, if my computer allows me. To immediately apply pressure to white's center. And a lot of people take here, which is probably the best move and the most testing line for black to face. And black essentially says, okay, we're going to split up the central pawns, and in the long run, we're going to apply a ton of pressure and hopefully win one of them to restore material equality, or maybe even both of them. My opponent, though, goes pawn to c3, just maintaining his pawn structure. And we'll just apply more pressure with knight to c6. There are some interesting lines here where white takes on c5 and black can take on e5. And black gets this kind of like 3-on-2 on the queen side. And black has a dominant pawn center with e and d pawns. White has no central pawns. But my opponent goes h3. So one of the main lines here is knight to f3, just fighting for the center. But knight f3 is not a good move because of bishop to g4, just pinning the knight. And I believe the position there is like minus 0.2. It's very, very nice for black, in my opinion. So my opponent goes h3, stopping my bishop from coming out to g4. And we have a few options here. So we could take on d4, and after c takes d4, we just, in the long run, apply loads and loads of pressure to this d4 pawn. Like the knight can come to e7 and then to f5, the queen can come to b6, the knight is already on c6, and we can apply lots and lots of pressure because it can't be supported by any other pawns because we've just traded off the c pawn. Alternatively, we could just go bishop to f5 and maintain the offer of the c5 pawn. We could go e6, just supporting the c5 pawn. Even knight to h6 is kind of a move here, because taking isn't always good for white. But in this position, I think it probably is. So I think I'm going to take. And the point is that this e5 pawn is very strong, right? It's supported by another pawn, and it controls squares deep in our territory. Of course, we now can't put a knight on f6, which is kind of annoying. But the d4 pawn is the pawn supporting the e5 pawn, and a pawn chain is only as strong as the base, right? So what does that mean? Well, this is the pawn chain. This is the base of the pawn chain. Yes, e5 is strong, but if d4 falls, which is the base of the pawn chain, then e5 will fall, most likely. So we are going to try to apply pressure to the d4 pawn. But let's first finish our development. Let's go bishop to f5. Then we can play e6 to create this classic Caro Kann pawn structure. My opponent offers me a trade of bishops. And let's not be too hasty. Can we take on d4 is the question. So, of course, if bishop b5, we just take the bishop, so that's fine. And obviously, if bishop takes bishop, then knight takes bishop, and we're up a pawn. What I'm thinking more about is after knight takes pawn, queen to a4 check, hitting the knight, but not trading bishops. There, I don't think we have a good defense, because after knight to c6, bishop takes f5, then we're just down a piece. So, do we have any alternatives? I don't think so. I think we should probably take. And I think this is probably a good trade for us, because, well, I don't see an issue with this, but we can consider other moves as well, such as rook to c8, because this bishop is potentially weak. I don't know. I like the look of the move e6. I also like the look of the move queen to b6, applying immediate pressure to d4. After knight to f3. Maybe knight to b4 is playable in conjunction with rook c8. Not sure, though. I feel like it makes more sense to just go e6. And the reason I think that the trade of bishops benefits us is because we've got a lot of pawns on light squares right now, particularly in the center of the board. And my opponent stops this, which Got to admit, I think that's a bit of a waste of a move because we don't actually have a threat there. I don't think anyway. Because I mean, just queen to b5 check. We of course have a lot of pawns in the center on light squares, right? So our dark squared bishop covers a lot of the squares the pawns can't cover, particularly if it comes to e7, which it most likely will. Whereas white has so many pawns on dark squares, this dark squared bishop doesn't have much scope. His light squared bishop, by comparison, could have been incredibly strong, but he chose to trade it. So I believe that's probably a good trade for us. And of course, now we could go queen to b6, applying pressure to d4. Bishop b3 can't be played because we win the b2 pawn. So queen b6, knight f3. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have anything after that, to be honest. So I'll instead start with knight g to e7, which is a very typical developing idea in the Caro Kann Advanced variation because you can't access f6. So normally you route the knight via e7 into f5 or maybe g6. In this scenario, f5 makes more sense because we're looking at the d4 pawn, right? Which, as I said, is an incredibly weak pawn. And if d4 falls, then e5 will fall. And the reason this is such a weak pawn is because we've traded our c-pawns off by playing take-take, right? That's the whole point. And therefore, like if you look at our central pawn chain, the base of the pawn chain is on f7, which is difficult for white to target. White's central pawn chain, like I said, the base is on d4, which is relatively easy for us to target. So let's go knight to f5. We always have to be aware of the move g4, attacking the knight, but we always have the h4 square supported by the queen. So we're fine, and we can rotate back to g6 if we need to. b4 is a bold move, potentially trying to play b5. We could go a6 to stop this, which looks reasonable. We could also allow this and just go knight to a5 and come into c4. But I like this pressure, so I'm going to play a6 just to be nice and solid. And you'll notice almost all of our pawns are now on light squares, which complements our dark squared bishop very, very nicely. Alternatively, it's unclear how this dark squared bishop will affect the game, other than just acting as a big pawn on the e3 square defending d4, which I have no issue with. This is kind of an ideal Caro Kann Advance variation, right? This is pretty ideal, and I believe we can just finish our development with bishop e7 and castles. I see no reason to overcomplicate it. Like I said, g4 we can always meet with knight to h4. And by playing bishop to e7, we can now move our queen to b6 if we want to, because if we play queen to b6 too early, then g4, and we don't have any support for the h4 square, right? So if queen to b6 and g4, we'd have to go knight back to e7, and then this bishop can't develop, and the knight is very passive. So be aware of that in the advanced variation. Bishop b2, that's not concerning. I think the bishop is much better on e3 because I'm not going to trade my knight for the bishop. My knight is fantastic. And this bishop sucks. It just can't do anything other than defend. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, hopefully you're also learning a lot. Please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you if you have any questions, please drop it down in the comments. I just forgot how to speak for a minute. Okay, knight to c3. Knight c3 is an interesting move because it seems like he's trying to justify his a3 b4 idea by bringing the knight via c3 into a4 and into c5, which is relatively annoying because let's say this knight lands on c5 and we play take-take, then the b file opens and b7 is very, very weak. So our first instinct should be, okay, let's just play b5 and stop knight to a4. Now, of course, we need to check, can my opponent go a4 and undermine our b-pawn? Well, no, not really, because b4 is way too weak for that. So b5 looks very natural, and then we can shift our attention to the c-file and claim this knight is a bit weak, which maybe it is. We can also potentially play on the king side if we want to. You should always check in these positions if f6 is a viable move. Okay. Yeah, if f6 is a viable move. Right now, I don't see a need to play it, though. Knight to e2 is interesting. So my opponent abandons the idea of this because, of course, we stop that. Interesting. We could go queen to b6, potentially preparing the move a5, which looks quite interesting. And if, like, take, then the knight comes to c4, and that looks very appealing. Of course, the queen comes to b6, not only to apply pressure to d4. We're attacking it 3 times. It's defended 4 times. Now it's defended 3 times. It looks like my opponent's going to swing his knight via b3 into c5, which is a cool idea, which makes me believe that we need to strike while the iron is hot and go a5 immediately. If a5 take, then knight to b3, we could exchange, or we could go knight to c4 and claim our knight is better than his knight, because I would argue it has more targets, which I like. And if knight to b3, well, then we just win a pawn with take. So that looks very good. Yeah, this is interesting because we always have to be aware of the weakness of this d4 pawn. And while, of course, like my knight on c6 and my queen on b6 are supporting my queenside pawns in an attempt to break open the white queenside, they also keep a really good eye on the d4 pawn, which, like I said, is just perennially weak. It is always weak. So let's play knight takes a5 to get the knight into the really nice c4 square by eliminating the b4 pawn. Also, a3 could come under heavy fire. That doesn't look like a good move. Let's go knight c4. And the thing is, a trade always benefits us, because right now, a3 and b5 are both weak pawns, right? Because they have no pawn neighbors next to them. But now that we trade, and I think taking with the b pawn makes a lot of sense, now we have a protected passed pawn on c4. White has a passed pawn, but it's weak. That's the difference. I think rook f to b8 needs no explanation. We line up on the a file and we line up on the b file. We are, of course, threatening this bishop. And as I said, all the way back... Where was it? All the way back here, I said I don't think the bishop is very good on b2. The bishop is much better on the e3 square, in my opinion. And I think we're seeing that. The bishop is just a liability. It's defending, sure, but beyond that, it serves no function. So, okay, rook to c2, defending the bishop. I don't see an immediate way into the position. We could go queen to b3, but does that actually do anything? I don't think so. I mean, if take, then rook takes. Okay, we make a little bit of progress, but is it anything substantial? I don't know. I don't know. We could go rook to a4, just stopping this pawn from moving. But again, I'm not sure that does anything. We need to try and figure out what the way through is. Again, as I said, f6 should be a move that is considered. Because, I don't know, take, bishop c5, we can maybe play for d4 and rook a4 to support the pawn. Yeah, that would be quite nice. But my opponent can just take, and this pawn is well defended. We have no way through. We could try and go e5, but we need more support for that. So that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Alternatively, we could try and triple up on the b file, but I don't know. Could go rook to a5 to triple up like this. And then maybe we're actually threatening to take the bishop. But even a move like rook a2 or rook b1 should defend well enough for white. So, okay. How do we go about this? Queen a7 looks very interesting to me. Preparing rook b3 with tempo on the queen, and rook a to b8. So the queen maintains an attack on d4 and monitors this pawn, but shifts out of the way for the rooks to take charge on the b file, which to me looks like a very nice idea. I'm not sure this is necessarily the best idea, but I think the reconfiguration of the pieces looks very tempting. Okay, I mean, that's such a passive move. Of course, he stops rook to b3, but I mean, these pieces are horrific. Absolutely horrific. We could consider a move like bishop to g5, applying pressure to the knight. But, I mean, I don't want to take the knight anyway. f6 maybe carries more of a punch now, because if take, we actually threaten the d4 pawn. That's interesting. And if take, then bishop to c5 is also interesting. Okay. What else could we do? We could go queen to a4, just applying pressure and stopping this pawn from moving, which I like the look of. If here, a knight here, rook here, looks pretty strong. Preparing to double up. Okay, let's go queen a4. This is one of those positions where we should be winning, right? This should be winning for black, but there's no immediate way in, and we need to be patient. We might just need to make a series of slow improving moves and wait for my opponent to make a mistake. And I mean, he's defending himself. Everything is currently defended in the white position, just about, but moves like pawn to f6 might come at the right time. We might just need to reconfigure our pieces, like, I don't know, rook b5, rook a to b8, maybe throw in h6 to give the king some luft, and then at the correct moment play the move f6. I mean, king f1 doesn't do anything. It's just a waiting move, really. White can't move anything. So let's just slowly improve the position. Let's go rook to b5. Preparing the double up. I think we shouldn't go too headstrong in trying to win the a3 pawn, because I don't see it lasting. Well, once some pieces get traded, I think there's a good chance it will just collapse by proxy, if you get what I mean. Okay, g3 is obviously not concerning at all. If anything, that's just weakening. Let's go rook a to b8. So now we have the rooks on the b file and the queen just monitoring, because normally you shouldn't lead an attack with the queen. The queen is kind of like a backbench player, and it comes into the fray at the right moment. Yeah, I mean, these are just desperate moves, really. And also, my opponent has seemingly granted us the f4 square. So let's go knight to h4, as I explained earlier. That's kind of the main square the knight goes to when g4 is played. And, of course, there's no knight on f3 to take it, but it is supported by the bishop nonetheless. And this bishop, like I said, is fantastic. With this pawn chain, by the way, incredibly strong because f7 is strong, which is the base of the chain. With the pawn chain on light squares, our dark-squared bishop is so complementary. So complementary. I'm sure the computer will find a way to break through the position quicker than I am finding. Maybe it's screaming for f6 every single move. But I don't think there's a massive rush, because I don't see what white can do. There's an argument to be made for sacrificing the exchange to win h3. It's an interesting argument, but I also think it's unnecessary. Does bishop g5 make sense? I don't know. I'm going to start with knight g6. Let's start with knight g6. Because the knight's not doing anything on h4. We don't have this because of this. I was thinking, well, maybe we can sack a rook and do this. And after a move like queen to here, we would have... Wait, does that just win? Hold on. Hold on, that wins. Rook here, knight takes, rook takes. The queen only has 2 squares where it gets... Oh, wait, that's winning. I'm going to see if my opponent repeats. No, he doesn't. Oh, I think I just missed a win. Oh, wait, no, this is a win anyway. This is a win anyway. Yeah. Rook b3 regardless. And, of course, you can take, and I will take. But the issue is that the queen is pinned to the king. This will be a really interesting computer analysis, because I feel like I missed a few wins here. I'm sure I've maintained a completely winning position and a completely dominant position nonetheless. But there were definitely easier ways to do this. Easier ways to do this. But hopefully it was very instructive nonetheless. And the engine analysis should be very interesting. But yeah, the queen is just pinned to the king. Nothing can be done. You can, of course, sack and... Well, actually, you're losing even more material because I'm hitting everything in your position. If rook here, I take the bishop. If bishop here, I take the rook. If the king moves, I take the rook. Or I just somehow mate you. But, okay, yeah, that's not concerning. Let's take. And let's drop the knight back. Apply pressure to f4. I suppose there's no immediate way through just yet. Technically, we have a queen and a knight for 2 rooks. But yeah, we bait the white position forward, essentially. I'm actually not going to take. I think dropping the knight back makes more sense. Because white is just creating weaknesses by pushing his pawns. And to be fair, there's no actual way in for my queen just yet. But now he gives a way in for my knight. My knight hits d4. My bishop can reroute to f4 potentially. I probably will throw in the move g6 to give my king some room, just to avoid any back rank ideas. Like I said, a3 is very, very weak, but it's also very well defended. However, the a3 pawn, all it's doing is restricting the movement of the white pieces. That's all it's doing. That's why I was so happy with the trade on c4 to play b takes c4, because I knew this pawn was just terrible. Okay, my opponent gives me a way in. I should probably take it, but my opponent resigns. So that is a irrelevant point. So yeah, let's get into the game analysis and see what the computer has to say. Okay, so my opponent played at 80.4% accuracy. We played at 88.0%. I feel like it should be a bit higher, but I mean, still very good accuracy. And I am very, very interested in some of the positions once I doubled the rooks on the B file. So we'll start with the opening. With the advanced variation, we go c5. Like I said, d takes c5 is one of the more testing lines, and black basically says, well, your pawns are split, and the e5 pawn is hard to defend, the c5 pawn is hard to defend. I'll at least win one of them back. One of the main lines is like e6, knight f3, bishop c5. The computer wants to give back the pawn immediately, for example. But okay, my opponent plays c3. We go knight to c6. I don't particularly like taking here immediately. I feel like it gives white easier development. But that's just my personal preference. We go knight c6. Again, you can take, and we will take here. And there's some interesting lines of it. Bishop b5, bishop d7, queen d5, bishop b5, queen e5. And here we go down a pawn, but like, the best move here is actually f6, which I don't understand at all. I'm not going to lie. Okay. What? Okay, my opponent went h3. We take on d4. C takes d4. The reason he went h3 is because this position, after knight f3, take, bishop g4, is very good for black. So, and by the way, if you're confused as to why, I have loads of videos on my channel from this position. Pawn h3, we go cd5, cd4, cd4, and bishop to f5. So we get our bishop outside the pawn chain, and then my opponent offers a trade of bishops, which we have to accept. And then we lock the pawn chain shut with e6. We've effectively achieved a strong French-like pawn chain in the center, but we don't have the bad French bishop stuck behind the e6 pawn. We trade it off quickly, and then we just have an ideal French. So we have pawn to a3, which I've got to admit, I think was a very unnecessary move. I wasn't trying to do this anyway. The computer does like it, but after like knight to f3, which was what I was expecting, I mean, knight b4 doesn't really do anything. Like, I don't know, queen b3, I'm not threatening anything. If rook c8, you just have knight c3, and I'm wasting my time. a3, though. The computer here wants the immediate f6. Really? If ef6, queen f6 hitting d4, knight f3 defending, and then h6, which looks incredibly weakening and not a very fun position, if I'm honest. I suppose you're going to get nice development in an open F file, but I don't know. It's an odd plan. Knight GT7 is still good, though. Knight F3, we go Knight F5, and like I said, G4 is either met with Knight to H4 or Knight back to E7, but personally, I think it's much easier to play Knight H4, and something like take, Bishop E3, and we're doing very well. But B4 was played. Bit of an aggressive move. I responded with A6. I half considered Bishop E7 and meeting B5 with Knight A5, which the computer does like. But I also thought that, well, my opponent might stop me from going Knight A5, so for the long term, A6 is just a good move anyway, because it supports B5, which of course we played later on. So castles, Bishop E7. Again, G4 the computer likes here, but just Knight H4, take, and on a human level, these pawns are potentially weak, right? Bishop B2 is very inaccurate. I thought that something like Bishop E3 or Knight C3 made just way more sense. The Bishop on E3, yes, I can take it, but my Knight is fantastic on F5. You've traded off a Knight that I've invested 2 moves into getting to a good square for a start, and also your Bishop sucks anyway, right? So Bishop B2, very happy to see that. We go castles. The computer wants H5, which stops G4, but I think is not that necessary. I mean, G4 isn't going to be played anyway, because this is just good for black, so I'm not really sure why H5 is such a big deal, but maybe the computer wants to keep the king in the center. I don't know. Knight C3, we go B5, stopping Knight to A4. Computer likes Queen D7, and if Knight A4, then Knight E5, and tactics emerge. And if Knight to B6, Knight D3, Knight D7, Knight B2, Knight F8, King F8, and the Knight escapes back to C4, and we're up, 2 pieces for a rook? But I chose B5, I thought it was easier, and there's no A4, because I can just take on B4 with tempo, queen goes back, I can take, and let's say knight takes, A5, I'm just up a pawn. So knight back to E2, an interesting move, rerouting the knight. Okay, we go queen B6, computer prefers queen D7, and if my opponent goes for this same plan... okay, so we are defending the B5 pawn with the knight takes E5 tactic. Of course, if take then take, and if takes then takes. And material equality is restored, but I suppose D4 still sucks, and actually Bishop F6 is maybe on the way. Let's say B5, I mean A4 stops this pawn from coming up, the knight comes to B6, this is all very nice. But Queen B6 is a very natural move. Knight D2 is inaccurate because of A5. The thing is, we do have to act with a little bit of urgency. If like Rook F to C8, Knight to B3, apparently still A5, but let's say we delay it even further and play H6, for example, then, I don't know, Knight C5 is quite annoying. It's not the best move, and the computer still wants A5, and the point is the knight doesn't actually target anything. But A5 needs to be played at some point. We might as well play it straight away. And we have way too much pressure on this A5 pawn, so white has to take. Knight takes. Rook takes is also good, but knight takes is far more natural in my opinion. And after Rook FC1, which is a mistake, because why are you fighting for the C-file when I'm about to block up the C-file? It makes no sense. Rook FB1 is better, because now if Knight C4... I suppose you're lining up with my queen. Bishop C1, Rook F to B8. If knight takes, B takes. If take, then take. Knight F4, Rook B3. This is an interesting position, but probably favoring black because of how weak D4 is. Like I said, that's kind of the whole point of this variation. But Rook FC1, we just go Knight C4. Very simple. And everything is under attack. Quite a bit. Taking, though, I don't know about that. That seems to help me. Of course, we take with the B pawn and not the D pawn, because that gives white potential counterplay. And also, the open B file is useful for us. So B takes, Queen C3. Rook FB8 is the best move, okay. Rook C2 defending. Queen a7, not the best. Rook a5 is better. And let's say my opponent does the same thing. Now Queen a7. Okay, what's the difference? Let's say Rook a2. h6. Let's say my opponent shuffles. The computer can't seem to come up with an actual plan. It just wants to shuffle. Okay, what's wrong with this? No, this is fine. Let's say the white king keeps shuffling. Queen a4, yeah, like what I did in the game. And now knight d4? Queen takes, and oh, right. That's an idea I didn't see. Overloading the queen. Interesting. I went queen a7, knight c1, queen a4, which is the best move to apply pressure. King f1. Yeah, I completely missed this knight takes d4 idea. Completely missed it. For probably many, many moves. Yeah, this is why my accuracy was lower than I would have liked, because I just kept missing this tactic. g4. Again, I could just take on d4, but I didn't see it. King g1. Here, I probably have rook b3. And after knight b3, rook b3, if you move your queen, no matter where, I always have knight f3 check. There are no other squares for the queen. So the best thing to do is apparently f4. And just, yeah, take, and we have a very similar position to what we had in the game. I missed that. I went knight g6, king g2. I then went back, trying to get the same thing. The computer also just likes rook b2. And if rook b2, queen d1, king h2, rook b2, queen b2, and then we deliver mate. We defend back rank mate. Very cool idea. But king g3, and then rook b3, which I eventually see the idea. Knight takes, rook takes, f4, we of course take, knight back to g6. There's loads of ways to win this, but I just kept it very simple. fe6, knight e6, rook f3, and my opponent resigns because knight to g5, coming into e4 with tempo. So let's say, I don't know. Well, no, that's really losing. Let's say rook e3, knight e4, king f3, queen c2. There is just no way back into this game. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot of useful ideas for the Caro Kann and just chess in general. If you want to see another video where I use the Caro Kann to great effect, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.